The classroom was cold with silence, not from lack of voices, but from the way curiosity stiffened the air. Bright white lights hung from the ceiling like sterile eyes, watching rows of young minds pressed into learning modules, their faces marked with scales, tusks, fronds, or feathers, children of 20 species, their bodies alien, their hearts still young. At the head of the class, Professor Here stood tall on her digitigrade limbs, her chitinous fingers weaving through holographic projections as she spoke in slow, deliberate tones. And so, she said, tapping a rotating image of a harsh blue planet swathed in swirling clouds. This was designated as a level 7 death world. Few organisms survive on such worlds. Fewer evolve into spacefaring species, but this one produced humans. A murmur rippled across the room, a collective hush of disbelief and intrigue. In the third row, a young student sat very still. His skin lacked fur, scales, or photosensitive layers. His eyes were too deep, too quiet. He had arrived weeks ago. A transfer from a refugee pod, discovered drifting near the ruined belts. No known species matched his DNA, but the diplomatic corps had accepted him under the Universal Protection Accord. They gave him the name Kieran and a seat in the classroom and a red identity tag that marked him as unclassified. He never spoke unless spoken to. He never smiled. He never cried. The other children stayed away, not from cruelty, but instinct. There was something different about Kieran, and they felt it like a breeze across the soul. Yar paused at the front, her voice sharpening with authority. Humans, she repeated, were violent, brutal, unpredictable. Their histories filled with war, self-inflicted catastrophe, and acts of savagery beyond comprehension. Yet they also demonstrated resilience, creativity, and an ability to form emotional bonds with even the most dangerous life forms. Empathy, they called it. A biological tool that let them care even when they shouldn't. Kieran didn't blink. His fingers clenched just slightly beneath the desk. Outside the window, the stars twinkled like tiny eyes, pretending the galaxy was calm. Another student raised a frownded limb. Professor, it asked in a whistling voice, are there still humans left? I heard they were gone. The professor hesitated. For the briefest flicker, her tall form seemed to shrink. The Terran collapse was complete. The last human colonies failed over 100 cycles ago. Their homeworld turned against them storms, quakes, heat, radiation. The planet did not forgive them for what they did to it. Humanity passed into extinction, at least officially. Kieran turned his head slowly, his eyes resting on the teacher with a strange softness, as if the words had pierced him in a place deeper than bone. She didn't notice. Now, Professor Here continued. As part of our Deathworld biology segment, you will each choose one species from Terra to study. Preferably one not known for lethal interactions. Avoid things like crocodiles, humans, or tardigrades if you can. We're looking for... She glanced back at Kieran then, her compound eyes catching his stillness, less dramatic examples. The room dissolved into quiet chatter. Holodisplays spun open with old earth fauna, wolves, birds, bees, and strange leaf-covered giants called elephants. Kieran remained motionless, but his gaze drifted toward the floating image of Earth, not the glowing sphere it once was, but a scorched ruin, its atmosphere breathing smoke and lightning. His lips parted slightly, just enough to whisper a name only he remembered. When the bell chimed, the students filed out, but Kieran stayed behind, his eyes still on the image. Professor Here started clearing the holoscreen, but something about the boy's silence made her pause. Kieran, she said gently, is there something you wanted to ask? He didn't look at her. His voice, when it came, was quiet trembling on the edge of something long buried. What if the monsters weren't always monsters? What if they just survived too hard, too long? Yard tilted her head. Humans weren't monsters, Kieran. They were complicated, brilliant and broken, but their world demanded too much. Sometimes we break before we understand. He looked up, and for the first time, his eyes shimmered not with tears, but with the weight of something vast and ancient. I remember fire and screaming. I remember my mother covering me with her body while the sky fell. She told me not to move, no matter what. She said humans are strong because they don't let go of each other, even when it hurts. The professor froze. Kieran stood slowly, and though his form was small, something in the room shifted. The air felt heavier. The stars beyond the window seemed to flicker with deeper purpose. I remember everything, he said. And you're wrong. Humans aren't extinct. He walked out without another word, leaving the professor alone in silence, her lesson crumbling behind her like ash asterisk. The hallway outside the classroom was lined with metallic vines, designed to mimic the flora of the neutral zone, but they smelled like nothing, and the silence in the corridors clung to Kieran like an invisible mist. It wasn't like Earth, not even close. No birds, no wind, no untrustworthy warmth of a sun that would sometimes burn too hot, sometimes vanish for days. The academy was built to feel safe, to keep danger out and learning in. But for Kieran, it all felt like a cage carved from kindness, a sterile world pretending not to watch him too closely, pretending not to wonder if he belonged. He walked with careful steps, quiet, almost ghost-like, yet each movement trembled with the weight of a past no one dared to understand. He was halfway down the corridor when someone called out. "Hey." The voice was light, chirping, unsure. Kieran turned to see a student he hadn't spoken to before Tally, a soft-furred creature with 6 slender limbs and bright, curious eyes. She approached cautiously, as if his shadow might bite. "Back there, what you said, did you mean it? About remembering?" He didn't answer at first. The instinct, the very human instinct, was to shut it down, deny it, hide behind silence. But something about the way Tally's ears tilted not, in fear, but in cautious hope, loosened the iron lock on his voice. "Yes," he said, "I remember Earth." Tally looked around nervously. "You shouldn't say that out loud. People talk. They think. They think you're different. I am different." His voice didn't hold pride or sorrow, just truth. As still and cold as stone worn smooth by time. "I'm the last. I think, maybe." She leaned in a little. "But how? Everyone says humans died out, that the planet ate itself alive." "It did," he said. "But we don't die easy." There was something in his eyes then, something old and aching. It wasn't just memory, it was loss carved into the marrow. Tally didn't know what to say, but instead of walking away like the others, she stayed. I'm sorry. I don't know what that must feel like." Kieran looked at her with quiet gratitude. "Nobody does. That's why they're afraid. It's not the death worlds or the muscles or the stories about violence. It's the feeling. We carry grief like fire. And no one knows how to touch fire without burning." Tally tilted her head. "But you're not hurting anyone." "I don't have to," he whispered. "They feel it anyway. Like something just waiting to go wrong." A pause. Then, softly, "I don't feel that. Not with you." And it struck him deeper than expected. Not because it was kind, but because it was rare. Words like that didn't survive long on Earth. Not when water ran black and the air burned your lungs. The last words most people heard were screams, but this was different. Someone seeing him, not the ghost of a species. They sat on a bench together in that sterile hallway, surrounded by silence and walls that smelled like too clean metal. Kieran told her pieces. Not everything, never everything, but enough. Enough to watch her eyes change. He told her about the day the sky cracked open, about running through fire with his mother's blood on his arms. He told her how humans held each other even when everything was falling apart, how they sang lullabies beside craters and drew hearts on walls of bunkers with chalk. He told her how his father died trying to save a dog that had once bitten him. And she listened, not with the shallow curiosity of a student gathering facts, but with the wide, aching heart of someone realizing the legends were not just real, but human. By the end, her fur was trembling, and she said, "That's not how they teach it." "They teach the fear," Kieran said, "because it's easier to fear than to mourn." Later that evening, the professor summoned Kieran to her private study, but he didn't walk in afraid. He sat down, back straight, gaze calm. Yer folded, her long limbs behind her desk, her usual confidence flickering behind compound eyes. "You understand," she began, "that claiming to be human, especially the last, will draw attention. Dangerous attention. I'm not claiming." Kieran said quietly, "I'm surviving." Yer nodded slowly. "You must know why the humans are both feared and mourned. Your people left a legacy of paradox. They built and destroyed. They united and betrayed. And through all of it, they never stopped feeling. That's why we kept going," he said, "because feeling hurt, but not feeling hurt more." She leaned back, watching him not as a student anymore, but as a piece of history breathing in her presence. "What would you do, Kieran, if someone tried to hurt this place? The academy, your classmates." He didn't flinch. "I do what humans do. I protect them, even if they don't love me back." It wasn't bravado. It wasn't threat. It was just what he knew. Here stared at him for a long moment, then slowly closed the security shutters. Then let's hope we never have to test that. But outside the sealed walls of the school, something was moving silent, patient, watching. A signal blinked in a long dead satellite network. One last fragment of an empire built on ashes. The galaxy had thought Earth was finished, but fire. Even when it dies, leaves embers, and something was coming to find the last one left. Asterisk, the following days were quieter, but not the kind of quiet that made you feel safe, more like the breathless pause before a storm. Whispers followed Kieran wherever he walked, not openly cruel, but heavy with the weight of legends suddenly given flesh. The others looked at him like a living myth, a museum relic that somehow blinked and breathed, but Tally stayed. She stayed. When he was silent, and when the nightmares made him retreat into the dark corners of the library, she found him there, not asking questions, just sitting close enough that her warmth reminded him the present was real. He was human, yes, but he was also just a boy. And there were moments in her company where that truth slipped to the surface like sunlight through cracked clouds dot in the evenings. They shared stories, not just of Earth, but of Tally's world, Lanethera, a place of sky trees and water that glowed beneath moonlight. She described how her people grieved with song, how they laid lost ones beneath blossoms and whispered their names into pollen so the wind would carry them forever. Kieran listened with a wonder that felt too old for his face, and when he told her about human funerals, about burying loved ones in the soil with trembling hands and whispered promises, she reached out with one of her furred limbs and gently touched his wrist. "You buried them all, didn't you?" she asked. His voice cracked, but the truth came anyway, the ones I could find. There was no heroism in the way he said it, only ache. A young soul twisted by the ruins of a world that demanded too much from its children. Tally didn't speak, but she leaned her forehead to his, a gesture of comfort among her kind, and he closed his eyes like maybe, for a moment. He didn't have to be alone. In class, the professor changed her tone, no longer speaking of humans. As cautionary myths, she adjusted the curriculum. Now they were studied as a tragedy, as a testament, and Kieran watched as his species transformed in the minds of his peers. Not monsters. Not relics. Survivors. It was Tally who said it first. "You're not a weapon, Kieran. You're a story that never finished." He wanted to laugh, but instead he whispered, "And maybe no one wants to read the ending." She shook her head. "No, they're just afraid it will make them feel too much." That night, while the rest of the academy slept, Kieran sat outside the dome wall, staring at a patch of stars his ancestors once called Orion. His hands gripped the edge of the bench like it might fly away. In the silence, he spoke aloud, not to Tally, not to anyone nearby, but to the ones he had lost. "I told someone about you today," he said. "I told her how Mom laughed even in the tunnels, how Dad tried to build a garden in a crater. I told her about the song you used to sing, Murray, the one about the rivers running backward. I remember your voice. I remember all of you. I'm not sure if that's good or bad." The stars didn't answer. They never did. But he swore. Just for a second, he felt the wind stir, though there was no wind here. Tally found him there and sat without speaking. She brought him a drink from her. Homeworld, sweet and glowing. He took it and said thank you without smiling. She didn't mind. "You want to know something strange?" he asked suddenly. Even when things were falling apart, people still tried to make each other laugh. We cracked jokes in the bunkers. We played music through the last power cells. It didn't stop the world from ending, but it made it less scary. "Laughter is a rebellion," she said. "That's what my mother tells me." He looked at her with something close to a smile, though it didn't quite reach his eyes. Then humans were the most rebellious species in the stars. She looked up at him, eyes shining. "You still are." And that night, beneath artificial stars and programmed gravity, the last human and a child of a distant world sat together like two candles keeping each other lit. No battles. No fire. Just shared memories, shared silence, and a bond forming not through power, but through pain that echoed the same, even in different blood, because sometimes strength isn't about what you fight. It's about who you choose to hold on to. Even when the universe tells you to let go, asterisk, it began with static, just a whisper, barely there. The Academy's communication grid hiccuped in the middle of a data sync, and most dismissed it as a solar flare disruption. But Kieran froze when he heard it, walking past a service terminal in the corridor. His feet stopped moving. The sound wasn't random. It wasn't background noise. It was a voice, crackled, fragmented, but human. He leaned in, eyes wide, breath caught in his throat. The voice came through distorted, but he recognized something too specific to ignore the phrasing. The rhythm. It was old Earth military protocol, the emergency frequency humans used in deep space evacuation procedures during the collapse. It was a ghost from a time no one else believed still existed. Kieran ran. He burst into Professor Here's office. Without knocking, his breath sharp, eyes wild. "There's a signal," he gasped. "Someone's out there." Here turned from her display slowly, studying him. Kieran, we detect strange signals all the time. Interference? Echoes? No. He said, voice firm in a way it had never been. This one used an old Terran distress code, pre-Union, and I understood it. Her compound eyes flicked with sudden attention. Understood? It said, evacuation group Sigma requesting extraction. Coordinates unknown. Autonav destroyed. Civilian payload intact. His voice cracked on the last part. Civilians. There are humans still out there. The words hit the room like a silent explosion. Yar didn't speak for a long moment. Then, quietly, that frequency was last registered over 120 cycles ago. It's impossible that anyone, nothing about us was ever. Possible, he said with quiet, searing intensity. But we did it anyway. She stood, back straight, clicking her limbs together. Show me. Kieran led her to the console, pulled up the cache, and found the data fragment. It was garbled, barely readable, but the structure of the code, the layered encryption, no other species in the galaxy used Terran distress harmonics like this. Yar's voice was hushed when she finally said, this shouldn't exist. But it does. He turned to her, something burning behind his eyes now. There's a group of survivors, maybe stuck in cryo, maybe trapped on a forgotten colony. We didn't all die. The galaxy just stopped looking. Later that night, in the privacy of her personal chamber, Yar searched her own archives. Diplomatic reports, unverified incidents. And the deeper she went, the more disturbing it became. Small things, isolated encounters. Mining crews who vanished in sectors long abandoned. Trade vessels reporting strange shadows matching human ship designs. Faint transmissions that no machine could decode, but perhaps one human kid someone had known. Someone high in the intergalactic assembly had buried these traces on purpose. Here stared at the dark screen in front of her, realization growing like ice up her spine. The humans weren't just feared for their past violence or unpredictable biology. They were feared because they were too hard to kill. Not physically, spiritually. A species that could rebuild society from ashes. That could outlast a burning world and still teach their children how to dream. The galaxy had mourned them, but not entirely out of sorrow. It had also needed them gone. And if even one of them remained, then all the myths, all the fears, all the tightly bound lies of history would unravel. Here summoned Kieran again, but her face was different, now troubled, shaken. Kieran, if what you heard is real, then this academy is no longer safe. He narrowed his eyes. Why not? Because someone out there will want you silenced before you find others? He stood very still. You mean someone knows? They've always known, she said, and now they'll come for you. It was Tali who burst into the room. Next, panting, fear blooming in her usually calm expression. The security drones, she said. They've changed their patrol routes. And I heard 2 instructors talking. They've called in external oversight. Kieran, I think they're going to take you away. Kieran's fists clenched, but his voice remained calm. Then I have to leave first. No, Tali said, grabbing his hand, gripping it tight. We'll leave. Yer looked between them, and for a moment, something ancient stirred in her remorse, maybe, or awe. You were supposed to be extinct, she whispered, but you're still here. And not because of strength, because of each other. The stars outside the dome pulsed gently, unaware of the fracture opening beneath them. Kieran looked out, heart beating like war drums muffled by time. The truth was out. He was not alone. And now, neither was the galaxy. The sky over the academy changed. It wasn't anything visible, no crackling clouds, no screaming alarms, but the feeling settled into every wall, every breath. Security drones buzzed just a little lower too often. Surveillance orbs lingered. A second longer when passing Kieran in the halls. Tali stopped smiling altogether. And though Professor here continued teaching as if nothing had changed, her eyes flicked to the exits too often, her fingers never far from the emergency override panel embedded in her desk. The walls had begun to whisper the same word, past. Between students who didn't understand its weight, containment. Kieran tried to stay calm. Tried to study, to walk the halls like a student and not a target. But the message had changed everything. It was like hearing your name echo from a grave. You thought forgotten. Someone out there had called out from the dark, and now the dark was listening back. He and Tali met in secret library corners, hollow maintenance shafts, observation decks during off hours. Together they mapped old corridors and planned quiet exits. Not because they had somewhere safe to go, but because someone was coming for him, and staying was no longer an option. The Intergalactic Oversight Committee had dispatched a ship, the Veil, and it was only days from arrival. Professor here confirmed it in hushed tones. her voice shaking for the first time since Kieran had met her. "It's not a diplomatic ship," she said. "It has no insignia, no transponder. It was built for one thing, extraction. What will they do to him?" Tally demanded, standing between Yar and Kieran like a shield. Yar hesitated, then looked directly into Kieran's eyes. "They'll disappear him. Lock him away in a black station so distant even starlight forgets the path. They can't. Let the myth walk free. Not if there are more out there." Kieran didn't flinch. "Then I'll leave before they get here." "Where will you go?" Yar asked. "You have no allies." "No ship. I have a friend," he said. He looked at Tally. She didn't look away, and for the first time since the ruins of Earth, he didn't feel like a child carrying the burden of a species. He felt human. And that meant something. It always had. They moved faster after that. Yeah. Gave them access codes buried beneath years of red tape. Tally stole blueprints from the infrastructure database. Kieran rewired a transport pod used for meteor sampling, stripped it of its safety regulators, and built an ancient flight algorithm from a Terran probe, one of the few fragments of his heritage he'd hidden in school's data archives. Piece by piece, they built a way out. It wasn't elegant. It wasn't safe, but neither had been Earth, and humanity had thrived in worse, but time was short. Vale arrived 3 hours early. Kieran saw it through the observatory dome, silent, black, and wrong. No lights, no ceremony. Just a long, narrow shadow drifting into orbit like a wound across the sky. No one made announcements. No dignitaries arrived. It just was. A presence that choked the air with purpose. That night, the head of security knocked on Kieran's door. Not an invitation. A summons. He stood at the threshold, dressed in the simple uniform of the academy, eyes too calm. "You'll come with us now, Kieran." Tally tried to block the door, but the guard, no longer just a guard, now clearly part of something larger, stepped forward, hand on a sleek black device. Kieran stepped between them. "I'll go." Tally turned to him in horror. "No, where?" "So close, just a few more hours." He touched her shoulder gently, his eyes calm. "If I run now, they'll hurt people. You, Yar, the others. I've seen it before. Seen what fear does when it feels cornered?" Her voice shook. "So you'll just give up?" "No," he said softly. "I'll stall them. You finish what we started." They took him without chains, without violence. Just quiet hands and a door that closed too softly behind him. Tally stood frozen, chest rising and falling, fury and sorrow folding inside her like glass about to break. Yar stepped out of the shadows. "We can't let them take him." Tally turned, eyes full of fire. "Then we won't." In the belly of the veil, Kieran sat in a narrow chamber, bright lights humming above him. A figure entered faceless armor, voice processed to remove species markers. "You should not exist," the voice said. "Your kind was concluded." Kieran met the helmet with steady eyes. "You fear us because we survived your conclusions." The figure leaned closer. "This isn't fear. It's order." "No," Kieran said. "It's denial, and that never lasts." Outside, in the silence of space, the stars watched. And within the school, Tally armed their plan. The ship, the signal, the escape dot, because now it wasn't just about one boy. It was about everything his existence meant, and the galaxy wasn't ready for the return of humanity, but ready or not, it was coming. Asterisk. The Veil was not a ship designed for comfort. Its halls were narrow veins pulsing with cold, silent purpose. Every panel, every sealed door, every uniformed agent walking without footsteps told the same story. Nothing leaves this place once taken. Kieran sat in a chamber that hummed with surveillance walls too smooth, air too clean. The lights never dimmed, not even slightly. It was not a place for sleep. It was a place where truths were erased, rewritten, then buried so deep the stars would never find them again. But Kieran knew what they didn't. He knew something bigger than secrets. He had learned it in the ruins of Earth, under burning skies. And beside graves dug by hand, resilience wasn't an act. It was a pulse. You couldn't extract it, couldn't suppress it. He'd seen people carry hope through fire. Now they were going to see it too. The interrogator returned faceless. Again, voice modulated into dispassion. "You will confirm your designation," it said. "Species, origin, known contact points." Kieran didn't flinch. "I'm human," he said. "From Earth, and I'm not the only one." The figure stared, or seemed to. "The story ends here." Kieran leaned forward, voice quiet. "You can kill a species. You can burn its cities. But you can't silence memory. Not when we tell each other stories, and I'm not just a story, I'm proof." The lights flickered, not in failure, but in breach dot far above the chamber. A maintenance hatch hissed open. Talia dropped in. Like a streak of fur and fury, 3 limbs guiding her descent, the 4th gripping a stolen ion spark. She landed hard, teeth bared in a snarl her species had abandoned generations ago. Behind her, the pod rumbled, waiting. Security bots spun. Toward her. But she was faster. 2 flashes of electric blue burst from her stolen weapon. The first bot collapsed, its limbs spasming. The second fired, but missed as she ducked, rolled, and came up behind it with a move too elegant for textbooks. Sparks rained like brief stars. Alarms screamed out in the chamber. The walls trembled. The interrogator turned sharply, receiving silent signals, and Kieran saw it, the hesitation. The break in the mask. She's coming, he whispered. And she's not coming alone. The door burst open with a roar of artificial air. Tali stood in the smoke, face wild with breath and defiance. Behind her, Professor Here stumbled into view, gripping a control sphere hacked from the Veil's interface core. Let him go. Tali growled. The interrogator raised a hand, but not to attack, to broadcast. A pulse shot through the chamber. Kieran cried out, staggering. The floor rippled, walls trembling as if the ship itself was being rewritten. But he held the pain back, gritting his teeth. Do it, yeah, he shouted. She slammed the control sphere into the terminal, and the chamber exploded with light. Every screen, every monitor, every relay point in the Veil's network flashed the same thing. A looping signal, the ancient distress code, the one Kieran had heard weeks before. But now it played loud, raw, undeniable, and attached to it, a fragment of a face. A child. Cryo-frozen, breathing, alive, not a story, not a myth. A human. Across the stars, the broadcast leapt through dormant satellites. Across old listening posts. Across Forbidden's channels, proof, YHARR turned to the stunned interrogator. It's out. You can't stop it now. But it wasn't over. The corridor behind them rumbled. More drones poured in. Black-armored agents. They moved fast. Efficient, Kieran and Talia turned to run, but the way back was closing, so he stopped. He turned, stepped in front of her. Talia screamed, "Don't." "I have to," he said, without fear. "If they catch us both, it ends. But if you get out, if you get to the others, humanity doesn't die alone." She trembled. "I'm not leaving you. You have to. That's how we survive." Not. By being stronger. By being willing to hurt for each other. Hare grabbed Tali's arm, dragging her back. The drones closed in. Kieran lifted his hands. They tackled him, pinned him down. He didn't fight, because in his pocket, tucked beneath the rags of old earth cloth, was the second copy of the broadcast sphere, and as they dragged him away, bruised and bloodied, he whispered, "Let them know we're still here." Behind him, the launch pod roared. Talia and Yahara escaped into the stars, and the Veil swallowed its prisoner, but the galaxy was already listening. The story had begun. The stars were different now. They burned with purpose, not silence. Somewhere deep in the uncharted folds of the galaxy, a forgotten signal moved like a heartbeat, slow, steady, undeniable. First, it reached the old war relics, abandoned listening. Posts that had slept for decades. Then, it crossed the drifting husks of colony ships left for dead. On planets where no human footsteps had echoed for generations, receivers blinked to life. The cryopod image played over and over, a child's still face, a fragment of humanity preserved in frost, a silent plea. The myth had become truth, and the truth had teeth. The intergalactic assembly panicked. For a moment, all the polished order of civilization trembled. Not because of warships or weapons, not because of power, but because of what humanity represented, the story that should have ended, but didn't. Tali watched it happen from a safe world light years away. Her fur matted from weeks of sleepless travel, her hands still raw from gripping too tightly during each jump through dark space. Beside her, Professor Here stood like a ghost carved from guilt and hope, replaying the message again and again. It had gone viral faster than any of them imagined. Translated, shared, archived. It could never be buried now. The name human was once more on the tongues of beings who had only heard it in hushed warnings. Now they said it with awe, with uncertainty, with possibility. But for Tali, it wasn't over. She had escaped the Veil, but Kieran hadn't. Every day she searched. Black market communications, smugglers' whispers, interstellar back channels where information was currency and secrets were knives. And every time she found a new rumor, a boy held in stasis on a covert ship, a human face glimpsed behind reinforced glass, her heart broke a little more when the leads went cold. They had hidden him too well. The fear of what he represented was too strong. A single human among billions in the galaxy shook. She refused to stop looking. Then, one morning, it happened. A package. No origin stamp, no traceable metadata, just a single device. A worn, scratched data crystal. She plugged it into a terminal with trembling fingers, heart pounding like thunder in her chest dot, and his voice filled the room. Hey, it was Kieran. Older now, just a little, more gravel in his tone, but still him. I don't know where this message will land, I'm guessing. Maybe with you, maybe not. They keep me somewhere without stars. No windows, no names. Just white halls and silence. I think they want me to forget who I am. But I won't, because I remember. The screen flickered. She leaned closer. I remember Earth. I remember my mother's voice. I remember you, Tally, and Yer. I remember how you came for me when no one else did. I remember that night on the bench, under the fake stars. You asked me if it hurt. His voice caught. It still does. But it hurts less when I know you're out there. Carrying the truth. Carrying us. Tears welled in Tally's eyes. They're watching me, listening, so I'll be quick. Don't stop. Don't let them erase us again. You wanted to know what being human really means? It's this, right here. A voice in the dark, still hoping someone's listening. The message ended. She sat there for a long time, hands shaking. Then she stood. Across the galaxy, more signals surfaced. Broken humans emerging from shadowed bunkers, half-dead cryo-colonies flickering back to life. Pieces, fragments, ghosts. Becoming people again. The human race was not gone. It had adapted just as it always had, hidden under the skin of history. Waiting dot, and now they weren't waiting anymore. The academy became a beacon. Tally and Hera returned to its halls not as fugitives, but as founders of a new initiative, the Ember Project. A call to all corners of space to find the forgotten, to give voice to the voiceless, to carry the torch of a species that had taught the universe one final, undeniable lesson. You can silence power, you can bury truth, but you cannot kill. Empathy dot, you cannot erase sacrifice, and you cannot stop the return of a species that refuses to let go of each other, even when the stars go dark, even when the world ends, even when all that's left is memory and fire. They called themselves the last ember of humanity, and together, they made sure the fire never died again.